for the recording,
Alright.
which has just started, I'm going to be taking the position, of course, that pro-life is not justified. Hermes is taking the position in abortion, all right, on abortion ethics to be very specific, that pro-life is the correct position, it's the correct ethical position insofar as approaching the actions towards fetuses, etc. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions just for clarification. What type of pro-life position you're adopting, and are there any exceptions which are baked into your position when it comes to the pro-life abortion position that you adopt in this conversation?
Yeah, I just generally find like abortion impermissible. My like stance in this debate is to like motivate people to espouse the view. And in terms like conditions, like yeah, I can grant in cases where the mother would die, or maybe some cases in rape. That's
Okay.
the only things
And
I'm
by
really
the way,
firm
just to be
about. Things
clear,
I'm firm
sorry to
on
cut
is
you off, but
to say
like
that. Hold on.
everything you're saying, by the way, just to be clear, so to cut you off, is I'm typing it out in the chat. So just like
Okay.
other debaters, it's not really beneficial for it to be like retracting your claims or whatever, because I'm typing out what you're saying in real time. Just make it that clear. Just giving you a heads up.
Is that bro? Tana, bro. Let me tell
But
you.
yeah, continue. Is there any other exceptions you have for the position right now?
No, that's it. So yeah, I'm just like generally find abortions impermissible, and I think that yeah, I'm just trying to motivate people towards the view. That's like
Okay, gotcha. So we
stipulations.
need a couple of things now. So you believe that it is not okay to, like, let's say, eliminate the zygotes, right?
Prima facie, yeah.
Prima facie. And when you say prima facie, what do you mean by this given context?
I just mean like first glance, like unless there's some sort of specified condition to explain or motivate someone to believe that it would be permissible, then yeah, I'll just find it
So you're
impermissible.
appealing to prima facie intuitions, correct?
I don't know what you mean by prima facie intuitions, but yeah, I'm more so trying to motivate the view through intuitions.
Okay, so you're predominantly trying to motivate the view through intuitions, and those intuitions are going to be prima facie.
Again, like I don't know what you mean by prima facie. I mean, like
You just
okay,
use the word prima
so
facie and define the word,
yeah.
so I
No,
don't know what you're going to be saying when you say that you don't know what I mean by the word after you
oh
just
my god.
define the word forming the conversation, right?
Yeah,
Kind of
so
like
when I say I don't
presenting
know what
something.
you mean by the word, I'm saying that word ascribed to another word. So when I say prima facie, I'm ascribing that to just mean like at first glance, when I look at an abortion, I find it impermissible unless there's some specified conditions. But when you say
Is that a
prima
knowledge
facie and
claim?
ascribing that to intuitions, what does that mean to say?
Is that a knowledge claim?
What would be a knowledge claim?
When you say
I'm
that
sorry,
at
what are you
first
asking as a
glance
knowledge claim?
abortion seems to be immoral, is that like a knowledge claim?
It's more so like just if it's just yeah, like I just already explained,
Because
it's like
you're
unless
implying
given
that
some
you're not
specific
going based for
condition.
intuitions in that proposition when you're claiming that it is prima facie wrong,
No,
right? So I'm
okay,
asking you,
I'll speak
is
on the
it an
view.
empirical claim or is it like a non-empirical claim? And how is it
I'll be
independence
fully
of intuitions?
okay. I'll be fully clear on the view. So to motivate the view will be based on the intuitions. When I say prima facie, I'm not sorry. I'm not ascribing that. Sorry, hold on. I'm not
Take your time,
ascribing
it's
that
okay.
to. Yeah, I was just about to calm down. I'm not
I'm really
ascribing
calm.
that
Like,
to
what are
just
you
saying
trying
that
to like
like
do
the
this optics bullshit?
sorry,
Like,
hold on.
I'm
I mean,
calm
you
right
immediately
now.
tried to do this as soon as I said something, but yeah,
But
like
I'm not the
just
one
to be clear in the
stuttering over my
position.
words. You
Okay,
are.
I
So if
wasn't even
anything,
stuttering. I
you
didn't
should
stutter a
be
single time. I don't know
calm.
why you just said that. I didn't stutter a single
I
time.
don't
I'm
know why
sorry.
you're
Okay.
claiming that I should be calm when you literally
Yeah,
stuttered over your
I'm
words and
asking you
I
to be
gave you
calm
an
because every
advice
single
and
time
told you to
I
take
didn't
your
stumble or stutter
time.
over a single word. I
Wait,
don't know
wait,
why you
wait,
just
wait.
said
My
that.
bad, my
You
bad. I'm
did
not gonna interrupt
actually.
any further, but do you guys agree to moderation
So
or no?
just re-articulate your points. Give me 1 second, Infinity. Just
Yeah, can I?
re-articulate your point.
Can we
Just
get a
speak
token stick?
slower, and then afterwards you
Can we get
can
a token
continue
stick?
the conversation. So what is your point here?
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you
Can we
guys
get a token stick?
do you guys agree with moderation or no?
I don't think moderation is necessary. I'm not spurring out. He's not spurring out. So unless we
I mean,
start
you're already
screaming at
starting to
each
pull
other,
clips every
then
time I'm about to
moderation will
speak,
be
bro.
necessary. But at the time being, just tell me what your point is and stop trying to do this like weird optical
I'm really not
masturbation
trying to.
because
Like,
you're not good in
you
the
just keep on
rhetoric.
throwing in clips every time
So
I'm about
what
to.
is your
Yeah, I don't
points
know why you
here,
said that.
Hermes? What's your points here?
Oh my god. Yeah. So the point is just that I'm trying to motivate people to adopt the view through their intuitions. Correct. So when I say prima facie, that just means to say that unless given some specified condition that makes those intuitions that specific
Just
scenario
relax, bro.
feels permissible relative to the moral judgments, then it's going to be impermissible. So I can grant that in some particular scenarios where someone's just me.
Is it just
So
me or is he
our
like
judgments
lagging
can
or
be.
stumbling or something? Or is my mic just
I'm
lagging?
not lagging or stumbling. I literally just the only thing I did was pause because someone else spoke as I was speaking. But no, when I
No
say
one is
that it's
speaking
prima
except
facie, I'm just
you.
saying that I have some general principle. Sorry, I just have some general principle that's going to motivate me to make my judgments on particular scenarios. But given the case that there may be some scenario that allows me to still adhere to this particular principle without but still end up making the judgment that it's permissible. Like for example, like one of the stipulations I gave is that if it's the case that the mother may die, then I would say that it's permissible. So I wouldn't even say it's permissible there. I'm more to say that I would not find the person to be doing a morally wrong action relative to the intentions. So when you say, okay, prima facie, or your intuition say that it's wrong to eliminate this embryo, I mean, yeah, I can grant that, but just in general cases. So, like, if you give me some specific condition, it wouldn't be a contradiction to my view to say that, okay, it's impermissible here, or maybe someone's doing an impermissible action relative to the intentions. If I said it's not allowed there.
Look, so now that we're back from Afghanistan, right? I'm gonna ask you again to just explain to me what the nature of your knowledge claim is, because that's the thing that we're really talking about here. Because you implied originally that when you're claiming it to be prima facie wrong, that was not a claim about your personalized intuitions or mental disposition. So I'm just curious about if it is the case that's an empirical claim, or is it non-empirical claim which you believe to be true about the world itself. So which one is it? Is it empirical or non-empirical? And if it is either, how is it going to be independent of intuitions?
Yeah, when you say like knowledge, like what do you think I'm making a claim that I know about here?
You're making the claim that you know about the moral status, or rather the moral facts as it pertains to abortion. So could you just answer my question, please?
Okay, yeah. So what I'm trying to do here, so it's even if it was the case, so I can do two things here. So firstly, I think that I have reason to believe that other people would have the same sort of intuitions that I have, because I believe that I've conformed to the social norms set. So the social norms give me some setup or like a network of principles, and there's networks of principles go inside my pre-conscious that motivate my subconscious into gearing.
Your pre-conscious?
Yes.
What do you mean by pre-conscious? And is this mic lagging out or something, or is it just me?
No, it's not.
Wait, just to be clear, did anyone hear his mic?
He's not lagging at all.
Okay, gotcha, cool. So Hermes, so just to be clear on a couple of things, right? So what do you mean by pre-conscious?
Yeah, so pre-conscious is just like the things within your subconscious. So I want to say subconscious, but some parts of your brain that you're not fully aware of that sorry, I don't know why I just said that. They just hold your memories that are ready to recall.
Dude, that would just be subconscious. It's not pre-conscious. Anyway, so moving on from this.
They're literally
You're just like using words proprietarily and just embarrassing. So look, moving on from that point, I want to focus on the other part, right?
You didn't fully get my view. You didn't fully get my view.
You said pre-conscious is things relating to your subconscious psyche. It's just fucking subconscious.
Yeah, no, yeah. So they can be
I don't know where like stuttering and then after try to laugh it out to like make it out as if you're not actually confident.
I don't know why you said that. There was no.
I actually said that because you're stuttering.
You said that.
Dude, could you just stop this? Like, what are you trying to do?
Single time. But yeah, okay, yeah, no, I'm fine. We can chill, but just stop like throwing your.
I'm chill.
Every time I say something.
I mean, you were like trying to tell me to calm down originally,
and you said I incorrectly used some word. Like that's just retarded. So
I agree, you sound retarded. That's what you're trying to say right now.
Right? I said what you did was retarded, so I'm glad you agreed on that.
Okay,
when
cool.
I say that
Nice opinion, bro.
Is some part of your subconscious.
Do you want the trophy for that rhetorical jab?
But
do you want some brownie
points? Part of your subconscious that's sorry. Just let me finish this.
I don't know why you apologize like you're my bitch. Just continue with the sentence.
Yeah, no. The reason I'm apologizing
because you're my bitch. Gotcha, cool. Just continue with the sentence.
Sorry. When I say sorry,
apologizing again because you're my bitch. Gotcha, cool. Continue.
Yeah, you don't understand that saying
sorry isn't saying yeah to me calling you my bitch is actually crazy.
No, when I say yeah, that
when you say yeah, you're not actually agreeing because you're autistic and you use words proprietarily. That's got you.
So to allow me to make some other statements.
Stumbling over your words is not good rhetorical signs right there.
I don't know why you keep saying that.
I don't know why you keep on saying. Oh, I don't know what you're saying after you started with words, but just calm down.
No, I genuinely need moderation.
Saying no again. You need moderation to get back shots on the rhetoric after trying to use rhetoric. That's crazy.
This guy doesn't understand
basic social norms.
I will say that we are trying to see a debate. So would you guys?
Yeah, I'm trying to see a debate. So I don't know like some of these optical masturbation
shit. It doesn't have to be me, but are you guys fine with agreeing to talking stick?
Of course, if that makes him articulate his points better.
Okay, so who would you guys like? No, if not me, who would you guys like?
I can go with Infinity for the time being. That's fine. So just lock in Hermes. Infinity can mute for the time being, and then afterwards let Hermes continue his point without trying to use this like weird, lame. And by the way, like, I'm gonna just say this before, type shit.
Yeah, I'm gonna just say this before, my nigga. I'm gonna just let a nigga speak, no matter, even if you think it's ramble. I'm gonna let a nigga speak, and then I'm gonna mute them and let the other nigga speak. I don't give a fuck about me determining whether or not it's ramble. But go ahead. So you said it was Hermes speaking, so I'm gonna mute you for now, Apollo, and then go ahead.
Yeah, so it's like respond to the thing he said. He said that I know that people have these intuitions, or I know some sort of claim relative to the intuitions pertaining to this particular scenario, which is abortion. So yes, I can respond to this in two ways. So firstly, I can make some sort of claim to say that I do have some knowledge, or I do have some things that make me believe, or things that make me believe that I have things conducive towards other people's intuitions relative to this claim. And it's just that my things that build my preconscious, which is the things that are memories that are in my subconscious that are ready to relax. I don't know why this guy keeps indicating in the chat. It's not rhetorical. I hope you realize, like, this guy's a fucking moron. Yeah, so these things that are ready to recollect. And the reason as to why we have these intuitions is because our subconscious use those things within our preconscious to gear us towards particular attitudes relative to specific scenarios. So in this scenario, I'm saying that the reason as to why I can make some claim, or at least I can have something that makes me give some reasons to believe that I have the same intuitions as other people, I share the interests of other people, is because I'm of the same social norms, or I'm adopting the same social norms, or I'm cohering to the same social norms. We can say even conforming to the same social norms other people have, which means likely some other people would also get the same things in the preconscious that are going to motivate their subconscious to have these intuitions. So that's probably the first reason I give. And then even independent of that, even if I don't have a claim to show that, I know these other people's intuitions like this, it could just be relative to the people listening to this rec. And if it turns out that the things that when I deliberate on this view, when we expand this view, they end up being motivated towards the view because it attaches to the intuitions or moral judgments relative to the view, which is all I'm trying to do is motivate them by either cohering to their network of moral principles or just being intuitively motivated towards the view to espouse it.
Okay. So is he muted?
Yep, give me a second. Where the fuck did this nigga go? I go out.
Okay, gotcha, cool. So, just to address a couple of things, he makes the claim that abortion is prima facie wrong in the cases that he's talking about, excluding the exceptions. Now, the reason as to why I keep on asking him if he's talking about intuitions, etc., is because I'm not even sure if it is the case that this is even correct, at least given the conventional view. I think that, like, given statistics, it is the case that most people, just a slightly more amount of people, are pro-choicers. They have this sort of intuitions, prima facie, that abortion is morally okay in the cases of the first trimester, to be very specific, or in the case where we're talking about the moral evaluation of zygotes. That's like really just what we're talking about there. So if you want to talk about intuitions as the predominant means of justification, or prima facie type claims that the predominant means of justification, then it would in fact be the case that that position is just incorrect from the get-go. His point just gets demolished in like a couple of seconds. So I'm really curious as to why he'd make that point, and I'm also curious as to what his analysis of prima facie is, or rather I was curious. He clarified what this means. He told me that his analysis of prima facie is something which is just to say that something is okay or not okay at first glance. So that sounds like an empirical claim. But empirically speaking, we know that at first glance, people don't have that position. People don't actually believe that abortion is immoral. Even certain religious people, like in Islam, that's the conventional view. In the West, amongst the liberalists, that's the conventional view. And in fact, that's just the conventional view in the US and in the West, just overall, that abortion would not be immoral in the cases of the first trimester. So I'm not sure where he's getting this knowledge claim from, or where he's even basing this knowledge claim on. So you can give your response now, and your points sound really scattered, so just lock in, articulate your points properly. And yeah, that's all I have for you, formally, basically. So just give a response, man. I got this slamming. There you go. You meet me now.
Thank you, man. Thank you for the stage, man. That was so nice. Yeah, so his response was basically saying that, we see that there's a slight favor towards people believing in pro-choice or that abortion is permissible. Yeah, I can grant that there's some things within the statistics, but there's multiple things I've problems with in respect to the things that I'm trying to argue. So I can grant that some people have a cognitive dissonance towards defining moral and immoral. Like, for example, when people found black people to be morally valuable in the same way that they would value other people. Like, of course, there are things within our judgments that make us believe that we can generalize persons to be to have enough moral value to it. We don't want to harm them. But if people lack the ability to correctly identify these things, to apply those moral judgments to them, there could be a cognitive dissonance towards those things. And I think that people lack, the average layman lacks the sort of introspection to be able to realize that their moral judgments is disjointed with their moral principles, right? So when we actually introspect and we say that, well, what makes me believe that it's immoral to kill a person? And then I see that, okay, well, it's because I have this particular feature. And then I could just say, well, there's no symmetry breaker between killing this fetus and killing a grown adult. because they have the same sort of moral value or the sort of principles that we ascribe moral value towards. So firstly, I need for us to understand what those stats are that say that, what they're cohering to, what sort of moral principles they have that, to make these moral judgments that it's okay. And then second, we also even have a lack of what they even mean by pro-choice or pro-life. Like some people may say that they're pro-choice, and then when you ask them, they'll be like, yeah, because I'm pro-choice, because what if the mother gets raped? And then you ask them, well, independently of the mother getting raped, well, are they still pro-choice? And then they end up saying, well, I don't know about that. So I need some understanding of what they even mean by pro-choice. And then thirdly, sometimes people have particular motivations towards a view, but those motivations are in confliction or at a dissonance with the motivations you have behind your view. So maybe they may consider these things to be not persons, and that's the reason why they're fine with aborting the fetus. Well, maybe you find this person to be a person, but you think that the sort of harm being given towards them isn't enough to be considered morally impermissible to commit this action. So I first need to understand if they even introspected on these sort of intuitions or judgments to understand if even it coheres with their moral principles. And then secondly, understand what the fuck they even mean by pro-choice. And then thirdly, you also need to understand what motivation they have behind them having this particular view.
Okay, so just a whole bunch of just gibbering, really, just nothing of actual substance. Look, you made the claim that apparently if you ask someone, or the average pro-choicer, if they would believe it to be okay, in non-rape cases, their response would be something like, I don't know about that. What's the evidence for that claim? We're even getting these sort of like proposition or belief that this would be true from. What's the source for that? Which you're not going to be able to present any source, because there's absolutely no empirical studies or any sort of empirical data which suggests that if you ask them that question, or if you do the probe, or as you ask them the question in those particular case scenarios, that would be their initial response. That's just unjustified, just going to neglect that position epistemically. Now, to talk about the actual thing here, you're talking about, you don't believe that the average person has the sort of capability to basically make correct, consistent moral claims or decisions, given the axioms or given the polyaxioms they adopt. Kind of interesting you make this claim, because you are within the set of average people. You're not intelligent in any special way whatsoever. It's pretty obvious based on how you're talking that you're not even intelligent. So kind of like hilarious how you try to implicitly put yourself on a higher pedestal than the average person, as if you're not even sub-average or not average yourself. And also, another thing is, then you're changing the position now. So it's no longer about prima facie intuitions or prima facie statuses of moral claims or moral judgments. Now you're changing it from a prima facie standard to a deliberative standard. So it's not the case to justify the position by appealing to the prima facie status of the moral claim that you're affirming currently, but now you're changing it from a prima facie standard to a introspective deliberative standard, which requires what is called reflective equilibrium. So you just changed your position, or changed the justification for your position, from something which does not require deliberative or reflective equilibrium to something which would in fact require this, given the fact that given the original standard that you've laid out in the conversation, it would actually point towards pro-choice, because there's a slight convergence given your original benchmark and gold standard, which would actually be something which points towards the position I'm talking about here. So that doesn't even work in your favor like you thought it would. Kind of embarrassing. So what's your next response you have to this? And don't ramble on for another 10 minutes. Just give a direct, clear, concise response so that your points sound intelligible and coherent. Thank you.
Yeah, man, I'm very succinct, very coherent, very concise, man. I'm one of the best debaters of all time, man. But yeah, here's the stats for showing that people, relative to the motivations towards having that view, it may change depending on the specific circumstances pertaining to abortion. So, some people, they may not even want to have an abortion outside of the first trimester. Some people think it's only okay in relation to rape. So again, that just proves my point there. And then secondly, you said, well, what makes you believe that you're on some higher ability to be able to introspect or deliberate or be able to understand my views? That's not what I said. I don't have a higher ability, because what you said that that I'm making a claim about them not having the ability to do this thing. I'm not saying that I don't have the ability to do this thing. I'm saying that they don't have the awareness to do this thing because they weren't given something that motivated them to actually introspect on their views. And it also didn't read on the sort of knowledge or the sort of papers like I did to be able to understand their views. Also made the claim that something that I said or the way I'm speaking is somehow implicative of me being of a low intelligence. That seems like you're actually making a claim on that, and that seems like it's actually going to be material to the conversation, so I want you to prove that. Or you can just drop that, and whether or not somehow I'm of a lower intelligence than the average person for me to say that my ability to introspect or deliberate on my views is better than theirs. And then thirdly, this is the reason why, bro, like when you want to start debating, like, bro, you gotta just like focus on other things before you get into debating, bro. This guy can't even track. There's multiple times you asked me, I'm talking about prima facie intuitions. I said no. I asked you what you even meant by prima facie ascribed to intuitions. Because what I'm saying by prima facie is that our intuitions will say at first glance these things are wrong unless given some specified conditions. The sort of introspection I'm talking about here isn't relative to just having some sort of specified conditions relative to the scenario or in respect to the scenario. It's just talking about in respect to how their intuitions cohere with the moral principles. And I'm glad that you picked up on the fact that I'm talking about reflective equilibrium to get my method of morality. So you can go ahead and respond, man.
Yeah, so actually, if you do any research, it shows that there's a positive correlation between articulation and intelligence. And in fact, you'd realize that majority, if not all, Down syndrome people cannot properly articulate their points. So, of course, the correlation between articulation and intelligence gives me reason to say that you're unintelligent, given the fact that you're inarticulate, and not just the fact that you're inarticulate, but the fact that you're presenting retarded dog-shit points in this conversation, which is pretty obvious given what's going on here. You also did not even address the sort of question I've even asked you. I asked you specifically what's going to be the evidence that people's decisions or opinions on abortion, in most cases, if they're pro-choice, would change if you're going to be talking about a non-rape case scenario. And you just completely dodged that question and just went off into a derailed dumbass point because you're retarded again. Not to mention, you talk about not tracking when you just mistracked that question, mistracked my points, mistracked your own points, and just basically committing this sort of like session of embarrassment, which is actually making everyone cringe out while they're listening to you ramble the entire time. But I want to get back to the substance though, which is something you're scared of clearly. So you made the claim that this is prima facie the case, right? And so I'm not making the claim apparently that this would be true insofar as you're necessarily appealing to intuitions, but that if you're appealing to a prima facie standard, even if you're not going to be making an intuition type claim, given how you define prima facie, which is just something being true given the first glance, that will not be true given the vast majority of perceptions, or the majority of perceptions, which is not going to be in favor of that proposition. Now, you said that you're not actually implying that you're at this higher level of faculty, but the point of the matter is simply, if you're going to be claiming that the average person does not have the ability to reason to a particular extent or to reflect on their moral decision making to that particular extent, right? Of course, you're criticizing the credence or the credibility of their sort of like decision making in the field of ethics. So clearly, it's the case you're putting yourself on the higher pedestal. And if you're not putting yourself on the higher pedestal, then you'd have to concede that you're like the average person who's incompetent at moral reasoning. So you'd have to concede that your own position isn't even credible currently, which of course you're not going to be willing to concede there. So really and truly, I'm not sure if by prima facie you're just talking about your own personal perception, which I don't know why anyone should give a shit about, why anyone should give a damn about your own personal, retarded, twisted, psychologically inept perception. But even outside of that, really, I really care about the justification for why you claiming that this thing is prima facie wrong, which you've not justified as of yet, would be evidence for the position that abortion is in fact wrong, even in the case scenarios I was talking about. Even in the case scenarios like the first trimester case, or the cases where the fetus does not possess subjective experience. That's what I really care about here, and that's what you're not really presenting any justification for. So just cut to the chase, dude.
All right, man. It seems like this guy had a really bad tracking error again. I mean, firstly, you asked me, or sorry, you said that I didn't track your claim, and I said that, people, when given a scenario of rape, that's why they say they're pro-choice. And then, when that thing is being taken away from the particular scenario, they're no longer pro-choice. Well, I literally sent you the stats in chat. I literally even told you this. I very explicitly told you this. I don't know what the fuck you said in track. Why simultaneously not track and say that I'm not tracking? That's pretty fucking retarded. And then you also said that there's a positive correlation between inarticulation and, having like a lower ability to, or lower IQ, or just, just a less intelligent individual. I want you to show me that, and also want you to show me or somehow demonstrate that I'm inarticulate or that I have shitty points, like you stated. And then again, you just keep repeating the prima facie doesn't work with majority of intuitions. I already told you what, like, you're just conflating the sort of prima facie justification here. Or I wouldn't even say prima facie justification because it's not even using here. I'm just saying that prima facie, our intuitions are towards a specific, particular thing. Not that our prima facie intuitions, like prima facie as a prefix towards our intuitions, are the sort of things that we use here. So I'm not using some intuitions at first glance without introspecting. I'm saying what after deliberation, after introspection, which I originally said at the very start when he first questioned me on this, and he literally like somehow didn't track, then we would believe that what actually coheres with our principles is these things that make us believe that pro-life is the correct view or the morally permissible view, which is a better way of saying it.
No, I'm going to step up
He's
the
just
rhetoric.
still not tracking it. And then you said that I'm still criticizing their ability to understand ethics. Well, yeah, like I can agree that when you have a complex topic and then you have someone that's able to actually deliberate on the view, they're able to get sources on the view, they're able to read papers on the view, they're able to talk with other people that commonly talk on this view, they're going to have a higher, more complex, more robust understanding of the particular topic. This is something true of almost every single field. The more you put into something, the better you are at it. Not much people put into work on understanding abortion or being pro-life or being pro-choice. And then at the very end, he said, well, why does like the prima facie justify the view? Again, like he's just still not tracking. Like when I say prima facie, there isn't some sort of justification towards the view. And again, I'm not even trying to justify the view. I'm trying to motivate people towards the view by appealing to their intuitions. And because you wanted to ask me this, I'm going to actually give them the intuition, or sorry, the motivation towards the view. Firstly, we understand that we have this principle that says that we don't want to kill or harm people, or sorry, persons. The fetus is a person. Abortions harm or kill the fetus, meaning that we have some principles that make us believe that abortion is impermissible. So that's the motivation towards that view. So if you want to question me any of those, you want to deliberate any of those, we can do that, man. I'll be very glad to do that. But yeah, when we actually understand what correctly aligns with our principles and not some sort of cognitive dissonance where people don't find the fetus to be a person, they may not understand that it actually aligns and is harmonic within their principles to say that they should be pro-life, or at least say that abortion is impermissible, which is my entire stance.
Okay, so I'm gonna demolish this point. Just let me just post the screenshot. Okay, I think this is it. Show this, yeah. Okay, so check the chat. So you talk about the idea that when you're talking about the position that abortion is wrong, you're mainly motivated that on the basis of, let's say, something such as people's intuitions or intuitions per se. Clearly, it's the case that the vast majority of intuitions do not point towards that. The viewpoint with respect to abortion does not point towards the pro-life position. So that means your standard of justification does not point towards your position. It debunks your position. That's number one. Number two is simply saying tracking is not going to be something which is indicative of good rhetoric. You're just recycling the same anime debater comebacks from retards. Like, you're not tracking. Not creative, not cool. You're not going to get into brownie points for this, okay? So stop trying the rhetoric. You're not good at the rhetoric at all, which is why I keep on starting over your words every single time. So the point of the matter is simply cannot be appealing to intuitions as the motivator for your claim, because that's what he said. He says specifically that you're going to be appealing to intuitions to justify the position that abortion is wrong. You can be appealing to that because, of course, if you see here, given the evidence, it's not the case that most people find this to be the case. That it is unintuitive to be a pro-choice, you dumb fuck, retard, loser, scumbag, piece of shit. So that's not the case. Secondly, you said that you're not using the claim that abortion is prima facie wrong to motivate the position that you're adopting here, you dumb fuck, retard. You're claiming that abortion is wrong. Claiming that abortion is wrong is something which is your position in this conversation. And so the claim that abortion is wrong is not the same as claiming that abortion is prima facie wrong. And so you claim that abortion is prima facie wrong is you making the claim independently of your conclusion, of your overarching position in this conversation. And so either it is the case that your claim or your asseveration of abortion being prima facie wrong is a justification or a premise in support of the claim that it is wrong, or it is not a premise, which in any case would just make it irrelevant and so just dismiss that particular point. So you pick your own poison, retard, on that particular section of the conversation. Now, you said that this is the case that you don't believe, or rather, I made the claim that there's a correlation between IQ and articulation. No, I did not, you dumb fuck retard. I made a correlation between intelligence and the particular aspects of articulation. You have multiple different types of intelligence. You have crystallized intelligence and you have analytic intelligence, and you even have something even as linguistic intelligence, right? So I was specifically talking about your ability to properly recollect the words that you should be using in the particular instance, which would in fact be a type of intelligence. Trivially, it's going to be the case that articulation has some correlation with intelligence, you dumb fuck retards. You're just making assumptions, speculations, and strawmans. You're just building up a strawman to slap it down and won't even attack the goddamn point. And most importantly, what's going to happen after I just ripped apart your points and ripped you apart like I've just done a while ago is you're going to do the retard dumb fuck strategy where it's going to respond by saying, oh, again, he did not track what's going on. He didn't track what's going on. And then repeat the same nonsensical bullshit and just waste everyone's fucking time. And then afterwards, you're just gonna go under the presumption that you're winning the conversation, even though your cheeks just got spread apart in a VC of over 20 plus minutes of the fucking voice call. You're fucking retarded. Give a response, stop wasting everyone's time, and give some goddamn fucking evidence.
Damn, are you good, man? Damn, this nigga angry as shit. What the fuck? You talking about spitting on my booty cheeks? What the fuck? Anyways, man, so when I said that our intuitions are going to be the motivation towards the view, I hope you understand that it isn't some sort of justification. You keep saying justification. I'm not trying to justify the view. I'm trying to motivate people towards my view. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to deliberate on what the sort of implications of this view are. If it's absurd to disagree with the view, if the view actually coheres with the web of morality. And then after we deliberate on that, it seems that people are going to connect these specific instances towards their principles so they gain the intuitions towards the view. That's what's going to motivate them towards it. So when you keep saying like the people have like this layman intuition for the view, that doesn't contradict my point. Firstly, I already dismissed the statistics before. I already made like 3 different arguments towards that. But then in this scenario as well, it's completely irrelevant because again, it doesn't even go into what I'm talking about, which is that I'm trying to motivate people towards the view after we deliberate, after we investigate the views. Like, holy fuck, I don't understand. This guy doesn't understand this. And then, again, I claim that abortion wrong, and that's not the same as saying that abortion is prima facie wrong. Well, I don't even remember me saying that it's wrong just in general. But, I mean, even if that was the case, that's completely fine because prima facie just be at first glance, it just be a generalized way of saying that. When I say that abortion is wrong, there isn't a universal claim. It could be a generalized claim, which is something that it's prima facie wrong because in most instances, unless giving a specified condition, it's going to be correct. Wrong or considered wrong. And then you said that I falsely rephrased what you said because you said that I made a correlation. I said that you made a correlation between being inarticulate and a lower IQ. I said that as well, but I also literally referred to the intelligence point. And then if you're going to change the point to say that it's intelligence in respect to your ability to recollect certain words, well, how is that relevant towards the original position that you posed here? Because the original position that you posed here to say that I'm going to lack my ability to deliberate on the points relative to other people, which is actually irrelevant because firstly, I mean, I would explain that, I can explain it again just for you to help you track because I understand after you get fucking annihilated on this debate, people are going to make the excuse that you didn't track this point like you typically do in every other fucking debate. So I'm just going to help you here and I'll explain to you, I'm not talking about the ability firstly, I'm talking about after giving them motivation to deliberate because people typically don't deliberate on their points or introspect on their points. And then firstly, and then secondly, I wasn't even speaking in reference to even in respect to the ability that has nothing to do with if they can't recollect or if they can recollect certain words, which is relative to what you're saying towards me. And yeah, man, we can continue on. Hopefully, this time you track. Keep saying that I'm saying you're not tracking. The reason I'm saying that is because you genuinely are not tracking. Like, bro, I genuinely feel bad for you, but I don't know. I could be debating for 16 years. You still this ass, but I'm not gonna lie to you.
Was that dumb rhetoric? Anyways, dude, so look, I've already broken this down multiple different times. If you're going to be making the claim that something is prima facie wrong, and then we see the opposing evidence, the opposing evidence points towards it not being the case, it is prima facie wrong, then clearly your original claim was incorrect. Okay? You're making an assertion here that this thing is prima facie wrong. If you're making this claim on the basis of just your own personal experience, why should anyone give a fuck? Of course, no one should care about your perception if you have not presented an irrelevant justification. Secondly, as it pertains to what we were talking about here, if we're going to be talking about, oh, well, I'm not talking about universality, I'm talking about generality. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. We've already went over the exceptions that you granted. I know you're talking about the generalization here. However, given the screenshot I've posted, that would also be reflective of the general case scenario because it says that people believe it should be legal in most, if not all cases. That's going to be a generalized assertion. So again, you telling me that the average person does not deliberate upon their moral decision making or their moral assertions. It's just you conceding that prima facie, given the average person's perspective, it is not the case that it is wrong. And so you'd have to demonstrate some reason as to why your position should be taken over their position, which you have not done this far. So that's just another blunder, argumentatively speaking. Now, you said that I'd have to be switching my point if I'm going to be specifying linguistic intelligence. No, you dumb fucking moron. You look like you scumbag. you can just specify a particular type of intelligence and would still be compatible with the position that it would in fact be correlated with a lack of intelligence in some given sense. So you just mistrack that point also. You're just attacking strawman to the strawman to the strawman every single time because you have no actual good comeback. Now, we're going to focus on the primary point, which is simply that you said that the primary means by which you're going to be motivating your position is through intuitions, and then afterwards did not even address the very obvious conspicuous fact that the vast majority of intuitions points against your claim, points against your position, your proposition, your overarching belief in this conversation. So that's just something else, which again points out the sort of inconsistency in how you're reasoning here. Now, what I really want to really get onto is what's going to be the justification that this thing is prima facie wrong, given all the evidence, given all the data, given all the information presented in this conversation, which gives us credences to believe in the opposing position? What's going to be the sort of wonderful, intelligent justification that you have, genius? Just go for it.
Hey, thank you, man. I mean, you're still just not understanding my point. Like, do I even like, bro? Like, how many times I have to repeat the point for you to probably, like, even digest what the fuck I'm saying? Like, I've said it multiple times. You said the prima
This
facie
is
shit. I
so
already
terrible.
explained what
He's
prima
like so
facie
lost
meant.
in
You
the
just keep on
conversation.
conflating what I mean by prima facie. You said my original claim is incorrect because my original claim was a generalized, and I'm saying that it's somehow prima facie. I don't like. Again, I already explained how those two are harmonic. Even if it was the case that I said generally that it's wrong, because what I meant by prima facie is that unless given some specific condition, that'll be wrong, which literally is aligned with it being generalized. That you agree to this. And then you said, well, why should I care about my original experience or my self experience? I already even explained how likely my experiences, or sorry, not even my experiences, my intuitions after deliberation, or sorry, not even my intuition, I have to talk about that, but my principles are likely something that coheres with the rest of people's principles. And then in addition to that, after deliberation, if I give people the same sort of motivation or rationalization towards the view that they may have the same intuitions after I explain how it connects to the principles. And then you said that I can see that they don't deliberate. I mean, I agree. You just keep on conflating what I meant by prima facie. When I say prima facie, I'm saying, intuitions without some sort of introspection. I'm not talking about that. When I say prima facie, it's relative to, unless they're given some sort of specified condition, they're going to find it wrong, man. Like, holy fuck. And then you said that, I'm shadowboxing your point because you said, well, some people, are unintelligent in some sense because, they can't recollect the sort of words they need inside of a debate or some sort of conversation that they need or to make a statement. Again, like the reason why I said that's not relevant to the thing that you said prior is because the sort of intelligence you want, the sort of intelligence you're trying to say that I lack, is my ability to rationalize or deliberate or introspect on my position. I literally said this again. So even if it's in some sense a form of intelligence, that has nothing to do with what the fuck you originally said. I need the sort of sense that's going to be relevant to my inability to be able to rationalize particular views. And then again, you keep asking me for the justification. I mean, like, I keep telling you it's not a justification, it's a motivation towards the view. And then, yeah, man, the motivation towards the view, or at least the deliberation or rationalizing the view, is to say that, the best account of personhood, seemingly, from what I've known, is some sort of personhood that takes in normativity. So I'm saying that someone is a person, which is one sufficient condition for being a person, is if they're the sort of thing that should have rationality, right? The reason why this is a good view is because it's inclusive enough to include all the people, all the humans that we want to include and give more consideration towards, and it's exclusive enough so that we don't end up leading to veganism or vegetarianism. I have stats on that because only 1% of the population is vegan, and then less than 20% of the population is vegetarian. So of course, most people are going to be inclined or have some sort of aversion towards becoming vegetarian or vegan. So this is something that actually aligns with their intuitions regarding veganism. And then, yeah, so if it's the case that, this fetus is a person, so they have some sort of moral consideration, so I'm going to care about whether or not I'm harming them because they are the sort of thing that has rationality. And by the way, because it's sufficient, not necessary, so there is other cases some could be considered the person. Then yeah, if I'm harming them by depriving them of all their future goods, then I think, yeah, like I'm not only killing them, but I'm also severely harming them, which is another principle we have. It's not severely harm persons. So yeah, man, that's the motivation towards the view.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I just want to laugh at this particular part when you said that I'll be having to be changing my position about the intelligence point when no one has ever specified the type of intelligence when I made the claim that would be indicative of you not being intelligent. So you just made an assumption on your own. I was specifically talking about linguistic intelligence, given the fact you're trying to be rhetorical, Yeah, so I just found that really hilarious, and then afterwards you conceded that, trivially speaking, it would be the case that it is going to be correlated to some type of intelligence. So really massive blunder right there. Just want to point it out on the table real quickly. Now, as it pertains to what you're talking about and so forth, these general principles, again, whatever general principles you might have, which you believe is going to be higher in the epistemic credibility status in comparison to the average layman, you'd have to demonstrate why those principles you believe actually justifies your position is the type of thing which points towards, or rather is more credible than my principle that I adopt, which makes it the case that I'm not actually, a pro-choicer, or rather a pro-lifer, and you have not done that thus far. So we just got that clear right there. You have not demonstrated any sort of justification for the claim right there that it would in fact be the case that those principles would be sufficient to actually say that your position is correct, given the fact I have opposing principles. So of course you can have to give a separate argument for those principles' credibility and epistemic status. And not to mention, we have to basically focus on the fact where you made the claim that something is prima facie wrong, but then afterwards conceded that it is the case that the average person does not share or does not have the first glance of it being wrong, which is just going to be something which is false if you're going to be indexing that prima facie claim to what is generally true of the moral agency population. So it's either that or it's just the case you're just making a personalized claim, which in any case, it is going to be the type of thing which is not something which anyone should really care about because I'm not given any independence and motivation for the proposition that this would in fact be correct. So, with that being said, do you have any actual reasons as to why those principles would be correct over my particular normative principles, which are not points in favor of that position? And if not, are you willing to be a man and concede this conversation?
I don't think that would ever happen, man. I mean, you're pretty ass. Yeah, you didn't even understand what I meant by changing your point on intelligence. I literally explained to you as to why it wasn't what you originally said, or at least not relevant. Said I literally told it to you twice. You didn't even track. I literally can't repeat my position to you 15 times before you're able to properly, adequately digest what the fuck I'm saying. So I'm just gonna move on from that now. Um, yeah, and then you keep saying, I have some principles that make me believe in, pro-life that people may not have. The only sort of principles that I'm depending on within my view is just to not severely harm or kill persons. If your ability to be able to contradict my point, or sorry, able to go against my view is just to deny those principles, then then immediately your view is going to go into absurdities that no one else is going to follow because no one else is going to think that it's not morally wrong to kill and fucking severely harm persons are going to be persuasive because it doesn't cohere with what they want. And also, can someone please fucking mute the person echoing? What the fuck?
Sorry, I got you. Did you know who it was?
I have no idea. I'm just gonna mute whoever the fuck that was. Oh my god. Oh yeah, I already gave like the explanation as to why likely. I mean, like again, I'll just give you like the point again because you just didn't even respond. Like track it last time. Like fucking hell, like it's actually so annoying. So again, like likely my principles or the sort of things that I have within my intuitions, or sorry, the things that motivate my intuitions, things that within my preconscious that motivate my subconscious to giving me these attitudes, are likely going to be the things that everyone else has because I conform to social norms and the social norms that people typically have because they're called social norms. What the fuck it says? Like that's like almost analytically true to say that social norms is what people typically have. And then, I mean, you said to show that they're better than yours, like the principles I have better than yours. I mean, you've never even given me any principles in this conversation. You've just told me that there may be some other principles that, I've given that, may not conflict with you have. I mean, I would hope that, the principle to not want to harm or severely kill persons don't conflict with what you want. The only thing that I'm trying to show is that given those principles, something that would follow is that pro-life would be true because it would be severely harming, or killing a person, right? And then, I mean, again, you just keep repeating the prima facie point. I'm going to explain to you again. When I say prima facie, I'm saying prima facie prima facie relative to the principles they have. So the principles are distinct from the judgments. The judgments are distinct from the intuitions. You understand this. You literally understand about reflective equilibrium. You brought it up yourself. So you understand exactly what I'm trying to say. So we have particular principles like very primitive notions, like you don't want to severely harm or kill persons. And then you have the judgments. Okay, because I do this, so because I have these principles, I'm going to say it's wrong to kill a person. And then I'm going to have intuitions relative to that. So my subconscious could give me towards to have an attitude to where I have an aversion, I have a more aversion from killing someone. What I'm trying to do here is try to show that prima facie relative to our principles not prima facie relative to our principles, but in relation to our principles, it should follow that it's prima facie wrong, which is that given the fact we're going to kill persons, fetus persons, the whole argument said like multiple times to haven't tracked it. And then given that in most cases, unless it's some specified condition that doesn't go against our specific principles that we have, that it would be all right, which is why the prima facie comes in. It isn't meant to say that, at first glance, when I look at a fucking scenario, I'm going to think that I'm going to have this intuition towards this. I already explained this multiple times. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, holy fuck. Like, okay, continue on, man. Hopefully this time you actually respond to track, bro.
Yeah, so it makes like a bunch of baseless claims. Like, for example, that it would be the case that given the fact that generally speaking it is immoral to kill persons, it would in fact be immoral to kill fetuses and zygotes, right? Which you'd have to demonstrate why fetuses and zygotes are persons, right? Given your kind of personal identity, right? There are people who adopt an account of personal identity such that just being a part of the human species is not sufficient to be a person if you lack subjective experiences, actually. Like, it requires psychological continuity, and in fact, that's going to be one of the main positions in the PID talks in the context of philosophy of mind. So that's going to require justification first that they are even persons. And even granted that they are persons, there are opposing principles which is going to be giving us good reasons to not believe in your position. Like the principle that there's nothing wrong with eliminating something which is not subjective or which does not have subjective experiences out of existence. So, for example, if I crush a rock or if I step on a rock, there's nothing wrong with that. But if I step on something with subjective experiences,
Hold
it
on, you
would
have
in
to be
fact be
muted.
the
Give
Wait,
me a
hold
case
on, wait,
second.
hold on, wait.
that
I
such
probably have to
thing.
repeat that. Someone cut you
Hold
off.
on, let
Hold
me.
on,
Yeah, I
Hold on,
know
hold
someone
on.
is
Wait, hold
cutting
on,
me
wait,
off,
chill.
but they're
Let me
not
time him out
distracting me
real
right
quick.
now because I'm locked into the conversation.
Yo, I was just
So,
gonna avoid if you say something while there's
yeah,
someone
that's.
was
I'm gonna
speaking, bro. I
repeat
want
the
to actually
point
hear something.
anyways
Okay,
because
okay.
you're gonna have to. Yeah, just basically, I'm gonna repeat the point. So the other person who interrupted midpoint, you tried to distract me, but it's not working because I'm the most locked in nigga in this freaking call. Now, anyways, to continue the point I was making before the retard rudely interrupted. Yeah, so I was saying that there's an opposing principle with respect to it being the case that there's nothing wrong with, let's say, terminating something without subjective experiences or whatever, right? So, whereas you believe that it is immoral to, let's say, step on someone's face, given the fact that this person can feel pain and all of that stuff when they have subjective experiences, there's nothing wrong with stepping on a stone, for example. There are things such as stones or pencils, all of these stuff, we don't give them moral value or moral consideration. All right, so given that principle, which most people adopt, the vast majority of people adopt, it would in fact be the case that we have reasons to not believe in your position because fetuses and zygotes, fetuses to be very specific in the first trimester, and zygotes do not have the subjective experience, qualitative experience, which would make it the case that they'll be morally valuable, which is going to be a anchor and determinant if it is immoral to terminate these given objects. So, with that being said, you're claiming that according to social norms it is the case, but the claim that this is true presupposes it being the case that fetuses are persons, and that's a contentious, controversial presupposition. Whereas my claim, which is that it is out of accordance with the social norm, given the moral value point about subjective experience, is not going to be predicated on any controversial, questionable, dubitable presupposition, unlike your claim. And not to mention, the claim you made also about the social norm point gets explicitly debunked when you look towards the fucking data, right? The data points that the vast majority of persons in society, whether it's in the West or even in other different types of society, would actually not be pro-life in the way you're talking about. So your claim gets explicitly debunked by the evidence I've posted in the chat, but I presume you can't interpret the evidence properly because you are illiterate, right? So again, I can read it for the next time if you fail to track the evidence this time again. But if you look towards the evidence, put your tracking goggles on, and pay attention to the dialectical GPS, your dumb pea-sized fish brain will understand that this is not something which is working in your favor. And so, I want you to do this one thing for me, right? I just want you to prove the claims have placed into question, if you remember, assuming you remember, which I doubt you actually remember because you have short-term memory loss. And number two, contend the actual arguments I've given, which points towards the evidential demerit of your position insofar as the credibility is concerned. So go ahead, monkey, be my bitch, and give a good response this time.
Hey, man, don't call me a monkey. What the fuck? Fucking bitch. Anyways, when you say that, I have to prove fetus is a person's, I already gave you my account of personhood, and I already explained how fetus would be within that account of personhood. I already gave motivation towards that account of personhood. I can give it to you again, man. I'll be nice to you and give it to you again. So the account of personhood is normativity, just means to say that the sort of thing that, sorry, this is a sufficient condition, but there's other conditions you can be considered the person, but at least a sufficient. but at least a sufficient condition to be considered the person is to be the sort of thing that has rationality.
That's
My
me.
motivation, or the reason as to why people should be inclined to believe in this or to adopt this view, to espouse this view, man. Very nice word. Sees that a lot. Copied it from him. Is that it allows us to exclude the things that we don't want to give more consideration towards, like animals, and it also allows us to include things that we do want to consider more consideration towards, which is like disabled people and shit that may have like a very low level rationality, but we don't understand that the sort of thing that should have rationality, right? They're in some sort of defected state that's predisposed to make them lack rationality, the same as the fetus, but we still give them more. Yo, can you time that nigga out? But we still give them more
Yeah.
consideration because um, of this view. Like it just shows that this view is able to actually accurately capture intuitions regarding them. And then you said, like you have some other principles that may be taken into consideration. Like if something lacks subjective experience, you can kill it. Well, there's a lot of problems here. Firstly, what level of subjective experience is relevant? So, like, is your principle inclusive of animals? Because again, that would just immediately lead into absurdities. People have to follow veganism to also believe that animals are persons and they shouldn't be considered to be harmed. And then, secondly, why is this a necessary conditions? Even if it's the case that I think it's sufficient, why is it necessary to have some active subjective experience? And then thirdly, is it the case that it has to be some past subjective experience? Or is it some active subjective experience? And if it's the case that it's past subjective experience, you need to understand if there's a psychological connection between that past person that has a subjective experience and a current person, or if it's some sort of chronological connection, because both views lead into absurdities. So you need to give me that. The type of connection between the thing that had subjective experience in the past and the thing that has the person now, or the human now, so I can understand what that would end up leading to, that may motivate people towards your view. Man, and then you asked me. Oh, sorry. Then you said that people typically, like in social norms, have principles against being pro-life. That's not even what the fuck the principle is. A principle is meant to be generalized, at least in the way I'm using it. Right? I'm trying to say there's some generalized primitive notions that just we can use to make more judgments, so like we can get our intuitions off of them. So I'm not saying so. Obviously, the fucking some principle that says pro-choice is the right view isn't going to be considered a fucking generalized principle. It's a very specific, personalized, precise a judgment. That's more so a judgment that makes our intuitions. I'm trying to say that the judgment doesn't cohere with the principle, and the reason I'm saying it doesn't cohere is because we've been falsely identifying those things to not be persons, because we consider it to be the case we want to severely harm or kill persons.
Yeah,
Man.
bless you, Felipe. Bless you.
Thank you.
That's it, man. That's the rest of my argument, man.
Thank you, Roy.
Yeah, so I think the debate is reaching the close. This guy just is lost for words, lost for arguments, and has nothing else to say, but just schizo-gibberating the entire time. So you're going to focus on a couple of things, right? So he points out the facts that given his position, it allows for disabled people to have moral value, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, again, the position that disabled people has moral value is going to be compatible with the position that persons will not be defined or semantically or conceptually cashed out in the way you're cashing it out. So it's not actually going to be the type of thing which is evidence for your position. Nice try though, retard. Now moving on to the other part of what you're talking about here. You stated actually that it is the case that apparently the kind of subjective experience of talking about here, or even appealing to subjective experience, might actually imply such that it is the case that we should not kill animals, etc., etc. Again, believing that something, our subjective experience, is a necessary condition for something to have moral value is not automatically indicative of the proposition that it would be the case that it would be indicative of sufficient moral value, right? You can believe that animals have moral value in the sense where they have moral value because they have subjective experiences, and not believe that that's sufficient to say that they always have sufficient moral value given that condition, right? You can believe that to be the case, of course, and there's no logical contradiction. So that's going to be something which is not actually pointed towards any sort of contradiction or any inconsistencies within my position. All I'm claiming here is that necessarily speaking, this would not be the case, and by this I'm talking about these things being morally valid, but that would not be the case given the fact that they lack this thing, this condition, this aspect, this precursor called subjective experience. Now, you talked about the idea of what is my kind of personhood. Again, I'm just talking about personhood so far as I'm saying that the necessary condition for something to be a person is that they have some sort of psychological experiences in their data set, right? That's not to say that you have to give it like a specific account of personhood such that it has to be indexed to this particular psychological continuity account. I'm given a necessary condition for someone to be a person, not a necessary and sufficient condition for someone to be a person. So I'm not given an explicit account of personhood, but rather I'm given an account of, well, not an explicit account, but rather I'm pointing out a given analysis of person which would be incompatible with your account, which is different, right? So given the fact that this would be a necessary condition for personhood or moral value, it would not be the case that your position could maintain the same level of epistemic merit that it originally possessed. And that's the point I'm making here. So those are the couple of things you're not tracking. You're not even given the evidential justification for your claim, and you said that persons are just things with rationality. What does it mean for something to be rational, right? I really want to know what does that mean, because if you're talking about rationality in the sense of reflective equilibrium or being able to deliberate or all that stuff, of course, zygotes, which is kind of like a little meat, does not possess any of that shit. Right? If you have a different definition of rationality, like an Aristotelian definition or something, just elaborate on it. But given how you've articulated and communicated the concept, it not just seems incoherent and just seems like an unintelligent nigger babble, but also it is the case. It doesn't really amount to anything, evidentially speaking, right? So you have the evidence, and by evidence, I'm talking about something which objectively makes your position more likely or necessarily the case that your account of person is correct, number one. Your account or analysis of axiology is correct also, as well as the fact of you not contradicting yourself given your original position, which is you appealing to intuitions, to which I've demonstrated beyond the reasonable doubt to point against your position.
Hold on, Paulo. Someone sorry. Bro, yo, time whoever did that, my bad. Yo, Paulo, can you just repeat
Yeah,
that,
that's
bro?
fine. So
Yeah,
the
hold on,
last
let me.
sentence was just me asking you to demonstrate some objective evidence in the probabilistic sense or in a logically guaranteed sense in favor of the positions of your positions on axiology, your position on whether or not it would be the case that personhood or your analysis of personhood is in fact correct, as well as whether or not you have not contradicted yourself or made any sort of inconsistent line of reasoning, given the fact that you've primarily and originally appealed to intuitions, which I pointed out to actually have a convergence towards my position, which you failed to actually refute. With that being said, I'm done talking.
Man, like, holy fucking, like, missed track of heroin,
I'll be
despair, and
crash out. He's
fucking
repeating the same comeback again
gauntlet
because he's
level
so
tracking, bro. I'm not
obnoxious and
gonna lie to you.
rhetoric.
Alright, so you said that, I mean, it's not going to be inclusive of like animals because it's just a necessary condition. Well, again, give the motivation as to why it's a necessary condition. And then secondly, if it's just a necessary condition, then why is it a sufficient condition? Because if you're just going to tell me that there's some necessary condition to be considered the person, you're not really telling me what a person is. You're not really motivating people to go towards your view, to not espouse my view, because they can't actually get another view to explain the sort of intuitions they have. You're just giving me some random necessary condition. And then even the example that you gave me doesn't even show that it is a necessary condition. If anything, it could actually be something that's an extension of my view, because my kind of personhood would exclude rocks, right? Because rocks aren't the sort of thing that should have rationality, of course, right? And then yeah, like I already gave the motivation. It's something that's like exclusive enough to where it doesn't include animals, and then it's inclusive enough to where it doesn't. It doesn't. So yeah, it's inclusive enough to where it's able to include disabled people. And then you said it doesn't have to have some sort of psychological continuity. I mean, the reason why I brought that up is because if it's a necessary condition to be considered the person to have some sort of subjective experience, okay, so one, there's people that are in comatose that lack even the first order potentiality to have subjective experience because they literally don't have the current capacity to have subjective experiences. They can't even be awoken. They don't have subjective sort of experiences. Subconscious sort of experiences. So that would lead absurdity there immediately. And then secondly, I could just give you a different one if you want to say that, it's some sort of chronological continuity between them, or like, maybe if they had some past sentient subjective experience, then where it's like, what if like your mother, right? You had a clone of your mother, and like she's about to be given all her memories, or even like a qualia in like 5 seconds of your actual mother. Like, would you be fine with me just like blowing her head off and like raping her? Would you be fine with doing that because she lacks any sort of subjective experience? So she wouldn't be considered the person, and that we would be willing to be able to harm the people under your view because it lacks sort of necessary conditions to not be harmed. And then, yeah, you asked me what does it mean to be rational? It just means to be acting on reasons or good reasons, or to be able to believe things on reasons. To be able to, believe things based on reasons or good reasons, and be able to act on things for good reasons. And so, to give like an extensive definition of that, it just means to say that, you're able to understand like logical inferences, you're able to understand propositional states like P and not P, you're able to, entertain like abstract concepts instead of just association concepts. So like I'm able to understand the architecture or the archetype of what a concept of the tree is, instead of just associating some like general notion of a tree. And then, yeah, I could give you even more like extensive, more exhaustive if you need me to. But yeah, it seems like that's something that a lot of animals, or like literally all animals apart from humans, lack, which is exclusive of all animals apart from humans, which are things we want to do, right? Have motivation to want to exclude animals because I don't want to be a vegan, or a lot of people don't want to be vegans. And then secondly, you didn't even check my point. You said, well, the fetus doesn't have rationality, so of course not going to be considered the person. I literally told you that the sufficient condition in this case is saying that it's the sort of thing. I already explained why it's the sort of thing. I literally just like it told you it twice. So you can probably understand. Like this be multiple times in this conversation. We have to restate the same thing 3 times for you still don't understand. And he said my account of axiology and to demonstrate some objective evidence for axiology. I mean, if you just mean axiology is the study of values, I mean, I'm not trying to give you any sort of some account of axiology or to demonstrate some sort of objective evidence for axiology. I'm just going based on the sort of values people ascribe towards certain things. So I'm not trying to tell you what these values are. I'm not trying to tell you how to evaluate these values. I'm trying to tell you based on what the things people identify to have these certain values, these general values. I want to be clear on that, but these very specified intuitive or moral judgments that I think that are at a dissonance with the general principles that they have. I'm talking about the general values, like to not kill people. I'm saying that that's something that that my view is something that actually accurately captures those principles, or actually accurately captures the sort of values people already ascribe to the world. And then yeah, that's going to be the intuitive motivation towards the view, man.
Yeah, so I kind of pointed out in the chat how you're shadowboxing, which you were, right? Because you're just a retard, right? You're just that retard. So look, you pointed out an example of a mother or a lady not being a person doesn't even attack the point, because for one, she not possessed in past experiences is not sufficient for her to not be a person. And even if it was to be the case she's not a person, that's not sufficient to say that she does not have moral value. I've already elaborated this on numerous different occasions. Don't understand that for someone to think to have moral value, it has to be a person, but rather I was making the claim that for something to have moral value, in most cases, it would in fact be the case that it would have to have subjective experiences. And if it does not have subjective experience, then it's evidence for it not having moral value in any way whatsoever. And there being things with subjective experiences, like let's say animals, like dogs, mammals, all of these things, chimpanzees, like you, for example, who is like a really low IQ chimpanzee in this conversation, right? Those things possessing subjective experience does not mean that it has sufficient moral value, even if it does in fact have moral value. And I'm making a claim about the necessary conditions for this given concept to be satisfied, not the sufficient condition. So a bunch of mistracks, a bunch of confusions you're having between sufficient and necessary conditions, because you're just not there yet insofar as philosophical reason, critical thinking skills, and situational awareness is concerned. And I would like to respond to the other part where you're talking about the idea of you believing that your position on person is justified and not laid out any sort of sound argument or any sort of probabilistic argument in favor of that claim. So I'm just going to epistemically neglect that position given the lack of evidence, lack of the evidential justification right there. And so we're left with a couple of things, which is simply the idea that you are delusional enough to say that your claim, your analysis of what people morally value is in accordance with social norms, even though it is the case that people genuinely don't give a fuck about things which are not sentient, things which do not have a life in the sense of it having subjective experiences. And it being the case that, generally speaking, given the evidence I posted in the screenshot, people do not give a fuck enough about fetuses. They don't care enough about fetuses such that the vast majority of people be pro-lifers. The average person who aborts a child, aborts a fetus, is not going to be having a weeping session or crying after that abortion occurred. They're just going to move on with their life like nothing even fucking happened. So your claim about what people value, your claim about what people actually care about, your claim about the axiology of people's psychological states is inconsistent with the goddamn evidence. It's inconsistent with the goddamn data. It's inconsistent with the information presented in the chat, which again, I doubt you're able to properly interpret information because of the very fact you're severely lacking in literacy, and that's fine. Not everyone is going to be intelligent, not everyone's going to be literate. So all I want you to do is just be a man, concede the point, and that's it. GG's.
Wait, did you mute yourself or did someone mute you? What the fuck was
Someone
that?
muted me, by the way, but whoever muted me, it doesn't matter because guess what? Even while I got muted, my recording is picking up what I'm saying, so kind of crazy.
Yeah, I'm just gonna avoid whatever you said there. I want you to repeat it. That's not my fault that someone muted
It
you.
was just a jab towards your lack of intelligence,
Okay.
as you'd
That's
say,
fine.
not substantive. So just give your response, dude.
Alright, man. Yeah, I got you, man. I mean, yeah, like again, you just keep on saying that it's some necessary condition to be considered. Or sorry, you said that it wasn't a necessary condition to be considered moral value, just a necessary condition to not be considered the person. Well, what sort of moral value can I ascribe to someone, independent of being a person, right? I need some sort of understanding, right? And then that also just implies that if they're not a person, then they wouldn't have the sort of moral value we're going to ascribe to other persons to that particular thing. So, like for example, if like I gave you the conscious person that didn't have active subjective experiences, and then you didn't even say past subjective experiences, sound like you said that they're now. I mean, if I had someone with dementia that didn't have past subjective experiences and psychological continuity, or currently as of right now, the capacity to even have sentient experiences because they're in a comatose, they literally can't even wake up, they have the capacity to get to engage in this sort of experiences, then obviously it's going to demotivate people towards your view, because you're saying that these people aren't going to be considered in the same way we consider other persons. And the second was said, it's just something that we typically ascribe more value towards. Well, then if it's typical, then I have a high likelihood to say that the examples I'm giving, under your view at least, wouldn't be granted more value. So one, I need to explain to me what sort of more value they can get independently of being considered the person. And then secondly, also need to explain to me, to explain to me how in this particular scenario they'll be given more value independent of them not being a person under your view. And again, the only sort of evidence you gave to me to believe that your principle applies is literally the rock analogy that fucking didn't even work, because I said that can also be the extension of my view to explain why people don't have more consideration towards those particular things. Holy fucking shit, this shit is so boring, bro. And then yeah, the only other thing you use, like the pro-choice thing, that's the thing that's in question, is whether or not that accurately coheres with a network of more principles people have. And then you said I didn't give a probabilistic argument. I want to explain to me why I didn't give a probabilistic argument. I gave you multiple in this debate. If you're just going to say I didn't, I'm just going to avoid that. It's going to be you just giving a rhetorical jab that you really did fucking nothing there. Yeah, I mean, there's like, I'm just kind of reading off my notes here. Is there anything even else for me to like respond to? Yeah, the pro-choice wouldn't be the value. It's just an extension of the values that they have. What else could there be? Hi, people don't generally give a fuck about things that are subjective experience. Already explained why it's not the case. Oh yeah, and the last thing you said that I was shadowboxing because for the mother example, you literally just agreed to like a crazy absurdity. So that's an easy clap. So you just agreed to, under your view, they wouldn't be really considered that much more more value. You said that it was a shadow box because they don't have the necessary things to be considered the person. Oh, that's great. You just explained to why everyone in this VC and everyone listening to the recording that if they were to ascribe to your view, subscribe to your view, they would not really give that much more consideration to a clone of their mother that's about to be given subjective experience and all the memories of their past, of their actual mother in 5 seconds, just be found raping and blowing her head off. So, man, that's pretty demotivating towards your view, bro. I'm pretty disincentivized towards your view. Seems pretty absurd, man. Yeah, I mean, hopefully you can actually give a response to anything I'm saying, something that's actually material to the conversation, and then we can conclude, hopefully.
Yeah, so you're just given a case scenario of a clone, and this is that's pretty desensitizing. Dude, just relax. It's not desensitizing in any way whatsoever, just to be clear. It's not something which is pointing towards any sort of intuition pump in your favor either. And most importantly, I gave two responses to this. The first response is me telling you here that, for one, me pointing out that it's a necessary condition, right? In the case of, like, for example, for something to be morally valuable, it has to have subjective experiences, is not me saying that it is the case that, well, not even subjective experience, but rather for something to be a person, it has to have subjective experience. That's not identical to me saying, rather, that for something to have moral value, it requires subjective experience. I'm pointing out a necessary condition for something to be a person, not a necessary condition for something to have moral value. And I've given the cases of the animals in which they have moral value, even though it is the case that they do not have these sort of things we're talking about here. And so far as personhood is concerned, that criteria is concerned, they're not persons. So you mistracked again. So it is perfectly compatible with all of the propositions I've asserted in this conversation for that mother to have sufficient moral value despite not being a person, and that mother still being the type of entity which has moral value, which would be sufficient so that it would be the case, would still be immoral. So that's not even an entailment for my position, right? So you just shed the box again for the 15th time. You're such a dumb retard. Now, you made the point about how it is a case that you want me to prove that you have not given the probabilistic argument. First and foremost, you have not connected any of the points you made with the idea that your position is going to have less parameters, or it's going to be something which is going to be the type of thing which asserts less independent propositions given an AIC model, nor have you connected it to frequentist probability or empirical probability or any of the relevant probability domains. So it would in fact be the case that you've not given the probabilistic argument, given the fact you just made claims such as this is correct given y, and not explain why there'd be a conditional probabilistic connection between x and y respectively. And we have this on the clip, by the way. So that's the other point I want to respond to. Now, you made the point about how it is the case, apparently, that your point would be justified prima facie. I guess you made the point, and I pointed out as to why that would not actually be something which is correct, given the available information of given in this conversation. And so, what you really have here is just a bunch of pontification, just a whole bunch of nonsensical points available, right? And so far as you made a point about moral value and about how it is the case that you believe that moral value is going to be the type of thing which would extend to these given objects, but not explain why these things would even have sufficient moral value, number one. And number two, how it would in fact be the case that the principles you have would be something we ought to prioritize over my principles. And so, what you have here again is just basis claims as a basis claims, basically. And I don't think there's any sort of reasons or means by which we can actually progress this conversation, because I just keep on having to repeat the same points over and over and over again, and you're repeatedly mistracking every single time, and then accusing me of mistracking to cope with the fact that you're mistracking because of your own insecurity. So that's really just it insofar as that is concerned, and that's really just it, man.
Yeah, man. Who the fuck did Flo send? Tell Paula someone to debate him his below. Who the fuck is that? Hey, yeah, man. Hopefully we can conclude soon, man. It's gonna get a repetitive. You said it's not decentralizing towards your view. I didn't say the thing that you said, by the way. I said disincentivize. So this means to say like demotivated towards your view. Yeah, the reason why I think so, I didn't have to give a reason towards that. You just agreed to saying that you could do that, at least in the case where not the sort of level of a person, right? So I mean, if it was the case you give no sort of moral value towards these things, then yeah, I think it would be pretty so I didn't have to explain this. It would be pretty demotivating or absurd to say that you could rape and shoot a clone of your mother and not give a fuck about it. But of course, you said the thing that I already responded to, you think I didn't respond to, is that, it's just the sort of moral value to be considered the person, right? You need this necessary condition to be, to be considered the person, or have the sort of moral value towards a person. That's what I'm asking, right? If it's not the case that they're not considered the person, then firstly, why is it the case that I should value them outside of them being a person? And then secondly, what sort of moral value will they have if they were to have value outside of them being a person? And then, I mean, like the sort of like motivation you get to, if you already explained, is either put into question, is this an extension of my view? I would explain how my view is something that's more in line with people's intuitions or their principles, because they don't want to be vegan. So it's going to be something to have a more aversion towards to being vegan. So it's exclusive of those things. And it's also something inclusive of things that people want. So it's something that actually explains my account. And then again, like, the necessary condition, another thing that showed that it's that's something demotivating towards your views, also because of the coma patient thing, where for some reason we're not considered coma patients persons, which is also demotivating towards your view, or something that's going to be considered absurd, because people consider those people to be persons, or so those humans to be persons, or at least even if it's the case that I can't demonstrate that, is the people that are listening, or people watching this recording are just going to think, well, I mean, I would consider a coma patient to be considered a person, even though it lacks the sort of necessary condition that Apollo gave. I mean, that just seems like another thing that I said prior. I can just say it again because you didn't track, is that I'm fine with not giving some sort of statistics to show that even though I did demonstrate how my intuitions are likely going to be in line with not intuition, but sorry, my moral principles are going to be likely in line with other people's principles, and that given the deliberation, I probably get the intuition that I have. It's just that even if they were just to listen to the recording, they can see these absurd implications, think, man, that's pretty fucking weird. I don't want to have a view that makes me get into these implications that I don't want. It's some sort of like Modus Tollens styled argument, where it'd be like, okay, if P implies Q, and I don't want Q, then likely I don't want P. I don't want the sort of thing that's generating Q, because, which would be P. And then, like, You said I didn't give a probabilistic argument because I didn't show why mine has like less parameters and give some sort of like some connection to probability. I want you to prove that. I mean, all I'm really showing so far is some sort of motivation towards people. So even independently given any sort of probability, people can just watch the recording again, be motivated towards the view just based on what I'm telling you here, what I'm explaining here. And then, yeah, the probability I gave is that it's something that can actually accurately capture people's desires, right? So obviously, if yours just seemingly doesn't, then seemingly it isn't the thing that's accurately capturing their desires. So, I mean, if you want to take that into consideration, something that's probabilistic, if you don't, it's fine. All I'm trying to do is motivate people towards my view. Again, you keep saying that the prima facie shit, like, oh, it's prima facie justified. People don't have prima facie intuitions. Again, and that's sort of prima facie I'm talking about already. Like, told you it's in conflation. You just keep repeating and not understanding what I'm saying. And then again, man, like you just keep saying this is some necessary condition, give motivation for it being necessary. All you gave was something that can be an extension of my view. And yeah, I gave reasons to why it's sufficient for my view. Oh, sorry, the personhood is sufficient. I gave sufficient motivation that people will be more in line or incentivized to believe in my kind of personhood because it gives them everything they want, man. They can include people that don't have subjective experience and still call them persons or active subjective experience or connection to some past entity that had subjective experience because they may lack the connection there. And then it's also able to include and exclude, which I'm not saying is something respectively better to yours and comparatively better to yours. I'm just saying that's something in general, because you haven't even given me something that would be able to demonstrate where we have more value to things that aren't persons. So seemingly right now it's able to accurately capture those things and explain why they have more value towards them and why they're able to give more value towards them the same way they'll give more value towards other people, right? We're not going to say that disabled person, I just don't give a fuck about them. Maybe the reason why I could see that, they have some slight like inclination to choose someone that has an actual ability to process things relative to some person that's just disabled is because they have desires that they'll be harming, they'll be frustrating desires. They have more desires, they have more self-awareness. So, they have a higher ability of rationalization that gives them higher desire-based harm. So I can see that maybe, but I didn't see any sort of reasons independent of that to believe that those disabled people don't have the sort of sufficient moral value that other people have. And yeah, man, I think that's it.
Yeah, so just a couple of bullshit points after response. So the first thing you said that the account of prima facie given was not about intuitions. Yeah, so the account of prima facie given is about something being true given first glance. And given the first glance, people don't believe this anyway. So given your explicit account of prima facie, whether or not you want to classify that as something with respect to intuitions or these sort of like epistemic mental dispositions, the claim you've made was still incorrect, given the statistical evidence that I presented in the actual chat. Secondly, I want to make it clear, right, that you made the claim that given my account of person that would be the case that coma patients are not persons, you absolute retard. It would in fact be the case. They'll still be the type of thing which is going to be persons, because coma patients do have a psychological profile which is indexed to a past temporal data set. So that was not in fact something entailed from my kind of personhood. That's another time in which you mistracked and shadowboxed and built up a straw man of my argument because you could not even attack the genuine argument of the conversation I presented this far. Now, you said specifically that it is the case that you believe there's reasons to believe in your position, which is not the case. In fact, a pro-choice position insofar as explaining the relevant data, about who is going to be morally valuable in the sufficient sense, is going to be something which is more parsimonious. It takes far less independent propositions about who is going to be, in fact, morally valuable in the sufficient sense, such that it influences the moral facts for me to be a pro-choicer than for me to be a pro-lifer. Because a pro-lifer is affirming more propositions, because it takes more propositions to affirm statements about who is, in fact, morally valuable, of course. So, insofar as parsimony is concerned, insofar as explaining the axiology of these given objects in the sufficient sense, it would in fact be the case that my position here is going to be more parsimonious. And then you claim that, or rather you asked me to explain moral value or something possessing or it being possessive of moral value without being persons. That's a pretty easy example. One easy example is, for instance, you don't think it is okay, like, push your meat in a dog, for example. You don't think it is okay to beat up a dog for no reason or torture a dog. The reason being dogs have moral value, right? They have moral value. It's immoral to do this, rather. And even though they don't have sufficient moral value when you're talking about, let's say, in the case of if we're going to be talking about chickens, in the case of killing chickens, chickens don't have sufficient moral value such that it is immoral to kill chickens. It is still going to be the case that they do in fact have moral value because we would both agree, assuming that you're not a weirdo, that it is immoral to, let's say, rape a chicken, and it's immoral to torture a chicken, just beat up the chicken for no fucking reason. Those are two examples or epitomes of immoral actions in society. And so that's the example that you've been requesting for the entire time. So we're going to highlight a couple of things. Given your analysis of what it means for something to be prima facie correct or incorrect in the moralistic domain, your claim is correct. That claim got dismantled in like literally 17 seconds flat. That was fucking easy. That was like an easy gold medal for me right there, dialectically speaking.
Boy,
Now,
shut the
the common
fuck
patience
up.
part, bitch, female dog, get back to the kitchen. Why are females in this? You know what? Actually, just ignoring the actual side character, NPC, loser, dork, piece of trash. Okay? Insofar as the common patient's point is
That's so
concerned,
ugly
shut
ass
up,
ass.
bitch. Stop talking. Stop talking. Stop talking. Insofar as the common patient's point is
And so far,
concerned, stop
nobody
talking,
give a
bitch. Stop
fuck.
talking. Stop talking. Someone mute this dog, please, and thank you.
Yeah, hold on, I got you, man. Yo, hold on. After this,
Let's
give
put
me a
the
second. I need
muzz
to
on
take
this
the
dog, please, and
fattest.
thank you. After this, we
I
can
need
head
to
to
take the fattest
conclusions.
piss after this.
Yeah,
No,
let
hold
me
on.
just finish my point.
It's after this. Give me a sec, bro.
Got you. Is he gone? Is he like AFK or something? Hermes is AFK?
No, I'm saying you can continue your points. I'll just
Okay,
like write
got
it
you.
down.
Cool,
I'll come
got you.
back
Yeah.
before I
So the
something.
common patient's point, you completely miscomprehended what happened because nothing about my point and my analysis of person is emblematic of common patients not being persons. So that was a mistrack. Parsimony point of explicated as to why the pro-choice position, given the explanation of what is going to be morally valuable, is going to be more parsimonious because they're forming less propositions about what is in fact morally valuable, because they're excluding fetuses and zygotes outside the data set of things which are in fact morally valuable. And last but not least, I've given the example of something possessing moral value sufficiently in some given context without being persons. And so that's basically it for my responses to all of the garbage you've said. You can give a response now.
Give me a sec, bro. I'm about to go fucking crazy in the toilet. Give me a sec, bro.
What?
That is crazy. Niggas like going on chat
So
GPT
it's
right
over?
Right
now.
after? Nah. Anyone trying to debate right after? On fiction?
Bro, shut your mustache up.
On what?
Yeah. We're trying to
Yeah,
get
I ain't gonna
some.
lie. Shut your bitch ass up, nigga. Who the fuck was that bitch?
Bro, debates fiction.
Yeah, I
Yo,
do
we're
debate
trying to
fiction,
debate. We're
bitch. And
trying
I
to
debate
debate.
philosophy, nigga. We could debate
Hey,
philosophy right
hey,
now, nigga. You ass, nigga. Like,
hey. Let's do IRL, man.
Fiction is gay.
chill out, man. I'm trying to take a shower, man. Nigga, like his
Who is this
ass.
stank ass nigga?
Bro, why did he say he needed to take a shower, God?
Ugh, nigga stink. Yo, we're trying to debate, man.
I
I'm
didn't say
very new.
you. I said I'm in the shower, bitch.
Why are you in the
Yo,
shower
why
with
are you
men,
butt
nigga?
booty naked in the
Pause.
car with minors? That's a
What
grown
the
ass
fuck
man.
is going on? Yo, chill. What the
It's a
fuck?
nigga in the shower with his dick out. Yo, who
Yo,
wanna
chill.
debate?
Everyone mute, bro. Everyone mute, bro. I'm about to get my points, bro. Hold on. Let me see what okay. Yeah, I mean, for the first point, like the prima facie thing, these aren't intuitions, these are first glances. I already explained what I meant by first glance. I explained this to you multiple times. The first glance just mean unless given some specified condition, which is like very consistent with what I originally said the whole time. That's just how. What the fuck? Yeah, that's just how I crashed it out. And then you said that the current patients would be considered persons because they have some sort of past temporal connection to their subjective experiences. I mean, yeah, like that just seems to give me the sort of argument that I want. Firstly, why is it the case that this is the same entity as it was before, and there's some sort of argument for persistence there? Or they said your sort of a persistence, my sort of persistence is that deflationist. So I mean, it's pretty easy for me to argue from my side. I need to explain why the subjective experience itself is this thing that's persisting over time, and then like why is it the same sort of subjective experience? And then secondly, holy fucking shit, bro. Oh yeah, and then this doesn't even follow to the whole like mother thing. You still haven't given me as to why we would value these things. All you told me is that we do value things that aren't humans. Like that doesn't really tell me as to why. So if it's sorry, that aren't persons. So if I was to say that this COVID patient person isn't a person. Sorry, this COVID patient individual isn't a person, or this clone of my mother isn't a person. Why should I value them? What you're telling me is that we have some sort of values toward things that aren't persons. Well, firstly, like again, that doesn't tell me that they have the same sort of value and why they have it. So I can explain the reason as to why we value animals because they're close to the sort of rationality we have, or maybe we have some sort of self-identification towards these animals because we can see that in psychology we actually feel as if those dogs, they end up activating the sort of things we use to observe and identify babies. So there's actually some sort of self-identification, prescribed value there as to why we may find it wrong without actually considering them a person, which could explain, or sorry, will explain why we don't have the same sort of moral value towards them as we do to other persons. And then you explain why it's more parsimonious. I mean, the reason why I said it's more parsimonious is because it takes less propositions to exclude the fetus. I mean, like, why is that? Why does it take less propositions to exclude the fetus? You would obviously need to give a proposition per variable. Like, the variable of an exclusion of something is still a variable. It's not the same as, like, inclusion being some sort of variable. It's relevant to some sort of parsimony. You also need to know what account of parsimony you're taking in. I mean, for it to be probability raising, I need to understand why mine takes less independent variables. Saying it isn't an argument, right? So, like, if you're going to exclude, like, 1, 2, 3, and I was to include 1, 2, 3, there's still a variable that makes me want to include those. Sorry, that's making me include those things, and there's still a variable for you to exclude those things. And then, yeah, man, you still just haven't given me the explanation as to why we would consider these other things to be as valuable as persons, yet we still consider them as valuable as persons, independent of them having subjective experience. And then, I mean, you literally haven't given me any sort of motivation to like why it's a necessary condition. Like, you've literally only motivation you give me so far is that it's pro-choice, but that's the thing in question, is whether or not this actually coheres with our principles. So you're saying if this is something that coheres with our principles, and that because it coheres with our principles, then that shows that there's some principle that says that we can harm things that are subjective experience. I mean, that's the thing that's in question here. So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna unmute you and mute myself, man. I don't think infinity's here anymore.
Okay, gotcha, cool. So just to respond to a couple of things. So the reason as to why it would be more parsimonious, it would take less propositions, is when you're talking about the data insofar as all the things which are morally valuable, because of the fact that your specific hypothesis is going to be inclusive of more entities which are morally valuable. For any entity X which is morally valuable, you'd be affirming the proposition that it is morally valuable. Whereas that would not be the case for the pro-choice, because their position is more confined to things with subjective experiences, yada yada yada. Whereas your position does not require the types of things which is going to actually, rather your position is more flexible. It's something which actually adopts even positions such as zygotes and fetuses being morally valuable, which is not within the domain of things which are morally valuable under a pro-choice ethical system. So of course, given that in the perspective, that would actually be the reason as to why it affirms less independent propositions, right? And as independent propositions, not variables. Variables would just be like the factors which influences why it would in fact be the case that something possesses moral value in the field of axiology. The propositions are just going to be truth-apt statements, which are going to be data points as why we would basically guide our hypothesis towards what is actually correct of the world, which is different things. So that's going to be the response to that part. Now, you made the point apparently that you've given an analysis of prima facie, etc. I've correlated your analysis of prima facie to what I said, so that's basically just something which you've not responded to, so I'm just going to take that as a concession. Now, you basically conflated synchronic identity to diachronic identity, right? So I'm not claiming that that particular aspect of subjective experience is going to be something which is going to be beneficial or contributive towards the diachronic identity information type of the given object, but rather I was talking about synchronic identity, what defines something to be a person in a particular single point in time, not any sort of persistence conditions. So me talking about what makes something a person is not me talking about what makes something the same person over time, which is a different proposition. You can even adopt the position that they are different persons over time, they change over time, and that would not be something which is evidence against my position, because I'm not, number one, given an account of personhood in the explicit sense, but rather points not at least one necessary condition for something to be a person in the given conversation. So you conflate synchronic identity with diachronic identity because, you just that low tier, that was like a low tier move from your end, and you got checkmates on the other points. So really and truly, there's nothing else to really address, because nothing else you've said is even worthy of addressing. It's just a whole bunch of jibber jabber. So if you have any more unique responses, you can give these unique responses, and then if there's not something which I need to respond, we could just head to conclusions right away.
Yeah, man, I still got to respond to some new things you just said, bro. So, yeah, firstly, you said that, mine's less parsimonious because it postulates, more independent propositions. Well, and then you kind of said that it's like the entities. Well, I mean, I can agree that I'll be granting more entities more value, but then your hypothesis will be excluding more value from more entities. So there's more, I guess, propositions or variables being postulated. Sorry, not more, there's an equal amount of variables being postulated. When it comes to the actual like relevancy or the probability, like why is like X hypothesis more probable? Like just because of some, like even if it was the case that one principle was able to extend over, or we could like derive more things from that principle, doesn't make the hypothesis less likely, because the hypothesis is postulating one thing that people can use to derive other things, right? So the only thing that I'm postulating here is the principle that people don't want to kill, and sorry, people don't want to kill the persons. Or sorry, it's morally impermissible to kill the persons. It's morally impermissible to harm other persons, severely harm other persons. So if anything, you're actually giving more principles by giving some sort of necessary condition to exclude the amount of people that can be derived to say that they're morally valuable. And then, I mean, you said that you're taking the concession, the prima facie thing. The reason why I stopped responding is because like we just literally went back and forth. That's not a concession. It's that I literally think that there was nothing else to get there. I don't think you understand my point or explained it multiple times. And then you said I'm inflating synchronic and diachronic identity. The reason why I said you need to give some kind of diachronic identity is because you're saying that the reason why this coma patient is considered the person is because of some sort of psychological profile it has with the past person that had subjective experience. If you're saying it's synchronic, it's some sort of account of synchronic identity, then obviously the coma patient wouldn't be considered the person, then because they have no current subjective experiences, but also because they have no connection to the past person with the subjective experiences. I mean, this is like, just like, this is it, bro. Like the last few points.
Yeah, dude, this is like so fucking embarrassing. This guy not only stole my argument against Eric about like how you just equalize the negative existential propositions with positive existentials to make it the case that, they're the same level of parsimony, but also that argument doesn't even work for the reason being that you're not going to be using negative existentials or exclusions to explain what is in fact morally valuable. What does the explanation is going to be the positive existential propositions. The negative existential propositions are just what would be entailed, right, in some given sense, which basically points out the theoretical barriers, so it prevents theoretical collapse. So for P and H, which are two different hypotheses to not collapse into the same domain, it has to be the case that there are going to be some differentiations. And for any differentiation X, it would in fact be the case that such differentiation is going to be the type of thing which is representative or represented by a negative existential proposition. So negative existential propositions are not the things doing the explaining. The things doing the explaining is a positive existential proposition. So if I say, for example, that the reason as to why John is at the mall is because there's an absence of unicorns, right? The absence of unicorns, the non-existence of unicorns, is not an object in itself doing the explaining there, right? It's a partial but not a sufficient explanation for it to explain what is actually going on. You're going to have to give a positive existential proposition to replace the gap or to fill in the gap to do with the actual explanation. And so that would be the thing which is going to be considered when we're talking about the simplicity and the parameters of a given hypothesis insofar as the amount of propositions being asserted. Negative existential propositions are just pointing out the differences between two theories. They're not pointing out, or rather, they're not doing the explaining there. They're not the ones doing the explaining work there. Because given that sort of account, I can then say, oh, well, your position is affirming negative existential propositions or negation to my negation claims in my given hypothesis. And so now your position is less parsimonious because whereas my position is affirming exclusions, which are going to be negations, your positions are affirming negations to those negations alongside the positive existential propositions you're initially affirming. And so there are multiple different layers of propositions that you'd have to be placing into consideration if you want to do like a probabilistic analysis on like the parameters of the given hypothesis. That's not how it works. We don't consider negations as the things doing the explaining when you're discussing AIT, for example, which stands for Archaic Information Theory Mathematics. You're retarded. You've never done any research on this. Stop watching my debates to get your knowledge of those debates. Do your actual fucking research. Okay. Now I want to respond to the last thing about you talking about synchronic, diachronic identity. You absolute inbred ape, right? You cannot be talking about you can't be talking about diachronic identity, or rather, I cannot be talking about diachronic identity in that given context. Because when I'm talking about something being a person, right? When I'm saying the coma patient is a person, I'm indexing that to the particular point in time at which it is in coma. And that would be one single point in time. You asking me to demonstrate why this thing would remain the same person over time would be you talking about a multiplicity of data points in the temporal scheme. And so, of course, that's you invoking synchronic identity, or sorry, diachronic identity in a given proposition, which is not even about diachronic identity, but rather about just giving a necessary condition for personhood, which is something which is pointing towards synchronic identity. So you don't even understand the basic differences here. You're just a freaking retard LARPer who comes on discord.com, watches my debates every single time, and learn a bunch of jargons and thinking you can beat me with that shit. But you can't, right? And I'm just too smart for that shit. I'm 87 steps ahead of you in this conversation. I've always been. So, if you have any new responses, you can give it new responses. And if not, then I could just head to conclusions because I think everyone is bored of this snooze fest right now.
Yeah, man, I can definitely agree. People are bored, man. It's pretty boring. I mean, you said I stole your argument about the negative existential propositions argument. No, I just literally just rationalized that for my intuitions. Like, if we're going based on the sort of variables that that a hypothesis depends on to be true. Like, for example, if it were to be the case that a hypothesis depends on like three coins being flipped to be heads, right? And then I don't know why this. Yeah, like this guy's funny. If it was the case that I depended on my hypothesis for three coins to be flipped to be heads, then someone else has three coins to be flipped to be tails. I mean, it just depends. If we took the tails to be the negation of that, it's not so much as to where it depends on explaining it. It's just dependent on what makes this thing true, like the sort of truth condition is dependent. It's like whether or not these negative things exist for this thing to be true, right? And then you said that like negative things don't explain things. Of course they do. Like an absence of like the flaw is what made me fall, right? And there's also positive variables that are going to be explaining why some sort of hypothesis works. Like of course it's a cohesion between both. Like there was a lack of a flaw there to make me fall, and then there's a gravity that pulled me down. So it's not just the case that all you did is focus on like some like unrelated like negative variable that has no sort of causal link between the unicorn and that particular phenomena. Like of course in that specific phenomena we just give some random negative variable isn't going to be explaining it, but there are some related variables like I just gave there. And then again, I just already explained that even if it was the case, we're talking about negative versus positive existential variables. Like I literally already explained to you. You gave a positive existential variable proposition. Sorry, you can just replace like the synonymous like a variable and proposition. I'm taking the proposition as the variable here, which is a type of variable here. Yeah. So when you take it to just be only even positive propositions to be able to explain a hypothesis, and that's the only thing you're looking for. Even under that standard, so then agree to, I could explain why. I mean, even then, sorry, you are giving a positive existential proposition to explain it because to exclude these other things, to exclude to derive these things to be morally valuable or morally invaluable, you'd have to give an extra necessary condition in addition to to some sort of other personhood account to say that it excludes these other things. Which, by the way, just to be clear, when you say, let's make sure I get the thing clear. You said, oh yeah, because it explains it. Sorry, the positive existential variables are the things to explain why things are morally valuable. It doesn't just have to be indexed to more morally valuable things. It could be as to explain why things are morally invaluable, which is exactly what's happening under your scenario. You're trying to explain why these things are morally invaluable because they lack the sort of necessary condition that you're postulating within your hypotheses. And then you didn't even respond to like the diachronic identity point. You just mostly focused on the terminology. Like even if it was the case that I was wrong on the terms there, that would still just mean you haven't given an explanation as to why the coma patient is the same person as to how it was before. What I mean by diachronic identity is to talk about the specific persistence between one property of that human. So the property of the human is going to be their personhood. So why is it the case that the person the quote unquote person under your view at least, that's in the coma is the same person that had the past subjective experience? You haven't explained it to me. And you also can't say independent of that they are a person because they lack any sort of subjective experience at that point in time. So I need an explanation for that. And then again, like if it's just some psychological count, to explain the synchronic identity. I can just give you another reductive. If someone had dementia, then I mean they wouldn't be the same person they had before. If someone had some sort of temporal dementia, and then they went into a coma, then that wouldn't even account for that person being a person, because they have no sort of psychological connectiveness to the past person, and they also lack subjective experience. And that's it, man.
Yeah, so the point or the aim of me saying that a necessary condition for something to be a person is for it to have some level of subjective experience at some moment in time is not for me to explain the persistence conditions for it to remain the same person over time. So you asking me, oh, how can you explain them being the same person over time? In response to me, my point, which is not even about the topic, is a non-point. It's irrelevant. I'm not even talking about persistence conditions. That's another example if you shed the box. If I'm given an account, insofar as I'm just given at least one necessary condition for something to be a person, and your response is you asking me to explain why these things would be the same person over time, even though that's not the aim of my given hypothesis, then you are essentially not responding to my goddamn point. That's number one. Number two is the example you've given, whereas the quote-unquote negation is doing the explanation. You basically substituted that negation with a positive claim simultaneously to do the explanation work by affirming the existence of gravitational matter, you dumbass retard. And again, in the given context, the reasons why negations do not increase lessen the amount of parsimony of a given possession is because the negation hypotheses, the negative propositions are going to be the types of things which the positive propositions and that given hypothesis depends on for it to be correct or for it to even remain the same hypothesis to begin with. And so it would be the case that independent propositions, insofar as the negative claims can be true that the positive claims and vice versa, but they both depend on one another, both sets of propositions. The set of all negative propositions indexed to a given hypothesis X and the set of all positive propositions indexed to that same hypothesis X are going to be dependent on one another insofar as the truth value assessment of one set of propositions or one or more than one element in a given set of propositions would influence the other truth value of the elements of the other set of propositions in the case of the positive case scenarios. So they wouldn't be independent propositions, they'll be dependent propositions. And if they're dependent propositions, the equation, the mathematical equation that should be utilized to make an extrapolation what is more likely would change, because we know that you don't apply the multiplicative axiom in the same way as you'd apply it to independent propositions as you'd apply to, for example, dependent propositions, right? So no longer would it be the case that the argument in favor of something being more likely on the basis of parsimony works the moment you concede on the fact that these things are dependent propositions and not independent propositions, which they are dependent propositions as I've explicated on a while
Wait, sorry,
ago.
hold on. The recording bot's gone. Hold on.
I'm recording anyways, it's
Who the
fine.
fuck stopped the recording bot? Bro, are you recording properly? Because your recordings before are like really like one-sided.
Whatever you say, man. So, with that being said, it would not be the case that this would be
Wait,
correct
can you
insofar
repeat
as
the?
you're talking
Wait,
about.
hold on.
I'm not repeating myself.
Hold on.
Nope, definitely not.
I'm just gonna wait everything you said.
Recording.
That's fine.
So,
Apollo,
with that
you're
being
my
said,
king.
stop
I'm your
interrupting.
seed. I'm your seed.
Yo, is
Stop
anyone
interrupting.
recording? Hold
Stop
on. I
interrupting,
actually see where the
Hermes.
power
Hermes,
thing's
stop
going.
interrupting. Stop.
I'm
Stop.
genuinely not trying to. It's just because of the
You're
power
literally
work,
trying
bro.
to by
Like this, I
accident
don't have
interrupt
to.
you right now
Like it's.
intentionally. I'm going to continue my point. I'm going to repeat myself anyways.
I'm not trying to do it in a negative way, but continue, bro.
Whatever.
Like, just
So,
continue, bro.
that's the response to the parsimony point I'm talking about there. And so, that's as well as the mistrack on the synchronic identity part. Nothing else to respond to. I think that's basically it.
Yeah, I don't know. He said that, like I said, the aim of the necessary condition is meant to explain the persistence condition, or like why the person will be, persisting later on. Like that's not what I even said. I don't know what the fuck you said. I was just asking for an explanation to explain why people have these sort of intuitions relative to this particular thing. Because if you can't explain that, then obviously that's not the things that people are using. Then obviously the thing that you're using isn't going to be the thing that intuitions are dependent on. The sort of principles that your intuitions are dependent on. And then again, you didn't even like respond to this synchronic diachronic identity point. I mean, the only thing you told me is that like I use some sort of positive proposition to explain it. I grant that. I'm literally saying that it's a cohesion between both. It depends on a positive proposition and a negative proposition to explain something. So like the lack of a flaw and gravity existing. So I'm saying both. And then you said that the entailments of each other. I grant the entailments of each other. So positive proposition or a negative proposition is an entailment of a positive proposition. I agree with that. I'm saying it's the same identically for both. So the entailment of each other, the lack of a positive proposition is a negative proposition. The lack of a negative proposition is an entailment of a positive proposition. I agree that they explain each other in the sense that they explain why they're in that sort of propositional state, not relative to the hypothesis. You're just conflating the two. And then I'm gonna unmute you, and then hopefully fucking something happens to the recording, but comes back or something, bro. Yo, after this, yo, send me the OBS recording, man, please. I'm gonna unmute you. Continue on, bro.
The Hermes is so tough.
Dude, turn your mic down. Fucking hell. Anyway, so you can just set the conclusions, give your conclusions.
Oh, well, I don't really want to conclude. I'm not gonna lie to you. 200 just end it here.
Okay, so I'm
Or
just
do you
gonna
want to
give my
conclude? I'm not bothered.
conclusions.
Okay.
Yeah, so my conclusions for this conversation is basically that Hermes, Mr. Stuttering, Stumbling Steven, failed to address a goddamn point of the conversation. Right? He failed to address the parts of the specs to the inconsistency between him appealing to something being prima facie correct, and did actually being the case that this position is correct. He failed to even address the parsimony objection. In fact, he just claimed that me affirming that this thing would affirm less propositions would have exclusions, and those exclusions is basically amount of negative propositions, which would equalize the amount of propositions between the positive claim or his position and my position, which in any case, if that was to be the case, he'd be admitting that our positions are equally parsimonious, and so he cannot even say that his position is more likely to be correct or it is in fact correct given the evidence. And that was basically one of the points that he has not even realized he implicitly conceded on, but debunked it, by the way. The moment he agreed that they'll be dependent propositions is the moment he'd agreed that the negative props will not be the types of things which are relevant to the explanatory mechanism, insofar as they are the crucial elements of doing the explanation by which we would use to determine the parsimonious nature of a position, but rather would be focusing on the positive propositions. And with that being said, he confused the synchronic identity with diachronic identity, made a huge blunder in that part, then tried to basically quietly concede that he made a blunder by saying, oh, I may have been wrong on how I used the terms. And then after I debunked and explicated and explained from scratch for the retard he actually is as to why it would be the case that this is not relevant to my point insofar as what I was talking about, he only responded by merely saying, baselessly rather, that it is the case that I never responded to what he said about the synchronic diachronic identity point without even explaining how I failed to even explain that, even though I did in fact give an explanation. So he tried to run away from the point, which he did, but it wasn't successful because everyone caught on to it because we are not as retarded as this guy, by the way. I want to say also at the same time that my aim was to explain the necessary, or just give one necessary condition of what makes something a person. Not to give a condition for the persistence relations of a given object when it is a person, but just to give a condition, a defining condition, or one of the defining conditions of personhood. So him asking me the question about persistence conditions, which relates to diachronic identity, which is another non-point of the conversation, which is him shadowboxing in this conversation, and him not saying anything which is fruitful or productive or beneficial towards this overall dialectic we're having right now. And so with that being said, I think he got like blown the fuck out. Really embarrassing stuff. I expected more given the fact he has been ducking me for like ages. And despite that, yeah, that's really just it. Done talking.
Are we done, man? All right. Could you send me the OBS after? I don't know who the fuck stopped the recording, but yeah, could you send me the OBS after, man?
Absolutely.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Hey,